1962, Hollywood had turned its back on Marilyn Monroe. They called her crazy. They called her difficult. She was the most famous woman in the world, yet she was completely, utterly alone, until Dean Martin stepped in. This is the untold story of the only man in Tinseltown who risked a massive lawsuit, millions of dollars, and his own career to save the dignity of a woman who had no one left to fight for her. But there's more to this story than you've ever heard. Hidden motives, secret meetings, and a decision that would echo through Hollywood for generations. The Battlefield. Summer 1962. Picture the scene. It is the summer of 1962. The sun is baking the asphalt of the 20th Century Fox lot, but inside the executive offices, the air is freezing cold. A group of powerful men in expensive suits have just made a calculated decision. They have decided that Marilyn Monroe, the woman who built their studio, the woman whose face defined a decade, is expendable. They are going to crush her. They are going to fire her, sue her for every penny she has, and replace her with a younger, easier model. They thought they held all the cards. They had the lawyers. They had the press. They had the money. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot who was standing in Marilyn's corner. They forgot that the male lead of their movie was Dean Martin, and Dean Martin didn't play by their rules. What they didn't know. Dean had already witnessed this exact scenario play out before. In 1960, he had watched silently as Columbia Pictures destroyed Judy Garland's career. He had promised himself he would never let it happen again to someone he cared about. In a town built on betrayal, Dean was about to teach the most powerful studio on earth a painful lesson in loyalty. This is the story of the 4 words that stopped a Hollywood empire in its tracks. No Marilyn, no picture. The Cleopatra catastrophe. Follow the money. To understand the magnitude of what Dean Martin did, we first have to understand the battlefield. The year 1962 wasn't just a bad year for Marilyn Monroe, it was a catastrophic year for 20th Century Fox. The studio was drowning. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. And the reason for their financial ruin had a name: Cleopatra. Across the ocean in Rome, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were filming the most expensive movie ever made. The production was a disaster. Sets were being built and destroyed without being used. Elizabeth Taylor was falling ill, delaying shoots for weeks. The budget, originally set to $2 million, had ballooned to an unthinkable $44 million. That's nearly $400 million today. Here's what the studio never admitted publicly. Internal documents later revealed that Fox executives knew Cleopatra was doomed by early 1962, but stopping production would have triggered insurance clauses that would bankrupt them instantly. They were trapped in a financial death spiral. Fox was bleeding cash. They were selling off their back lots just to keep the lights on. Panic had set in. The board of directors was terrified. They needed a scapegoat. They needed to show the shareholders that they were still in control, that they could still discipline their stars. But they couldn't touch Elizabeth Taylor. She was too big, and Cleopatra was too far gone to stop. So they turned their eyes to their other production, Something's Gotta Give. The hidden motive. Fox executive Peter Levathis had a personal vendetta. His wife, socialite Virginia Levathis, had been publicly snubbed by Marilyn at a Hollywood party 6 months earlier. In the cutthroat social hierarchy of Beverly Hills, such slights were never forgotten. When the board needed a scapegoat, Peter saw his opportunity for revenge, disguised as business strategy.
The perfect storm. A woman under siege. It was supposed to be a lifeline, a quick, funny, relatively cheap comedy starring two of the biggest names in the world, Marilyn Monroe and Dean Martin. A remake of a classic screwball comedy designed to print money and save the studio. But instead of a lifeline, it became a noose. The executives at Fox looked at Marilyn Monroe and didn't see a human being. They saw a liability. Marilyn was 36 years old. She was battling severe depression, anxiety, and a debilitating dependence on barbiturates. She was terrified of aging, terrified of forgetting her lines, terrified of the camera that had been her lover and her tormentor for 15 years. She needed help. She needed compassion. Instead, Fox decided to use her as an example. "If we can't control Taylor in Rome," they whispered in the boardroom, "we will destroy Monroe in Los Angeles." The psychiatric truth. Dr. Ralph Greenson, Marilyn's psychiatrist, later wrote in his private notes that she was suffering from what we now recognize as complex PTSD, stemming from childhood trauma and decades of exploitation. In 1962, mental health treatment was primitive. The barbiturates she was prescribed were the very drugs destroying her ability to function. Enter the King of Cool. Dean Martin was casting a long shadow in 1962. He was arguably the coolest man in America. He had successfully broken away from Jerry Lewis, reinvented himself as a solo superstar, and was dominating both the music charts and the box office. He was a member of the Rat Pack, a friend of presidents, a man who seemed to breeze through life without a care in the world. When Fox approached him to star opposite Marilyn, Dean agreed instantly. Why? Because Dean Martin understood Marilyn Monroe in a way few men did. On the surface, they were opposites. Dean was the picture of relaxed confidence. Marilyn was a bundle of nerves. Dean didn't care about art with a capital A. Marilyn was obsessed with the method and proving herself as a serious actress. But underneath, they were kindred spirits. The backstory nobody knew. In 1954, Dean and Marilyn had a 4-hour conversation at Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound. She had just finished The 7-Year Itch. He had just split from Jerry Lewis. Both were reinventing themselves. Both were terrified. Dean told her that night that she never forgot. "The secret, sweetheart, is making them think you don't care. The moment they know you need them, they own you." Marilyn tried to follow that advice, but she wasn't built that way. She needed to be loved too desperately. They were both outsiders who conquered a world they didn't quite belong in. They both wore masks. Dean wore the mask of the drunk, the carefree playboy who didn't give a damn. Marilyn wore the mask of the dumb blonde, the sex symbol who was always happy. Dean saw through her mask. He saw the sweet, frightened, intelligent woman hiding underneath. He had known her for years. They had crossed paths at parties, at events. He made her laugh. And for Marilyn, a woman surrounded by predators who wanted to use her, a man who just wanted to make her laugh, was a rare treasure. Dean signed the contract for Something's Got to Give with one specific clause, a clause that is standard for superstars, but would become the weapon he used to destroy the studio's plans: co-star approval. He signed to work with Marilyn, not just a female lead, her. He looked forward to the shoot. He thought he could protect her. He thought his relaxed energy would calm her down. He told friends, "I'll get her through it. We'll have a few laughs, sing a few songs. It'll be easy." He was wrong. It would be the hardest production of his life. The production from hell. Filming began in April 1962, and from day one, disaster struck. The director Fox had hired was George Cukor. On paper, Cukor was a legend. He had directed The Philadelphia Story and My Fair Lady, but in reality, he was the worst possible match for Marilyn. He was rigid, sharp-tongued, and impatient. He hated method acting. He hated Marilyn's acting coach, Paula Strausberg, who followed Marilyn everywhere like a shadow. Cukor created an atmosphere of tension and hostility. He would roll his eyes when Marilyn asked for another take. He would make cutting remarks about her tardiness. And Marilyn was crumbling. She caught a severe virus early in the shoot. She had a high fever, chronic sinusitis, and lost her voice. Doctors ordered her to stay in bed, but the studio didn't believe her. They thought she was faking it. They thought she was being a diva. Every day she missed cost them money they didn't have because of Cleopatra. From the assistant director's diary, day 23, Dean arrived at 6 a.m. as always. Marilyn called in sick again. Cukor exploded, threw a chair. Dean walked off set, said he was going to visit her. The studio threatened to dock his pay. He said, "Go ahead, I got enough." He spent 3 hours at her house, just sitting with her, making her tea. This man is different. The executives started a whispering campaign. They leaked stories to the gossip columnists. Marilyn is drunk. Marilyn is high. Marilyn is losing her mind. They were systematically dismantling her reputation to cover their own financial incompetence.
The birthday that broke everything. Then came the breaking point. In May 1962, while supposedly too sick to work, Marilyn flew to New York to sing Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy at Madison Square Garden. We've all seen the footage. Marilyn in that rhinestone dress, glowing, singing to the president in that breathy, seductive voice. It was a moment of triumph for her, but for the executives at Fox, it was a declaration of war. They were furious. She's too sick to act, but she's well enough to sing for the president, they raged. They felt humiliated. They felt she was mocking them. The hidden calculation, what Marilyn didn't know was that Fox executives had actually leaked her trip to the press themselves. They wanted to create the narrative of an unreliable, attention-seeking diva. They were setting the trap that would justify firing her. Attorney Greg Bautzer, who represented Fox, later admitted in a sealed deposition from 1964, "We needed public opinion on our side before we pulled the trigger. The Madison Square Garden appearance gave us exactly what we needed." When Marilyn returned to the set, the atmosphere was poisonous. She managed to film a few scenes, including the famous swimming pool scene where she looked radiant and happy, but the damage was done. On June 8, 1962, Marilyn called in sick again. That was it. The studio heads at Fox slammed their fists on the table. They decided to pull the trigger. They fired her. The public execution. It wasn't just a firing, it was a public beheading. Fox Studios issued a press release that was designed to end Marilyn Monroe's career forever. They didn't cite creative differences. They cited willful breach of contract. They announced they were suing her for $750,000. In 1962, that was a fortune. It was an amount designed to bankrupt her. But the cruelest cut was the personal attacks. The studio gave off-the-record quotes to reporters portraying Marilyn as a drug-addicted, mentally unstable wreck who was impossible to employ. They wanted her to be unhireable in Hollywood. Marilyn was devastated. She locked herself in her bedroom at her Brentwood home. She drew the blackout curtains. She stopped eating. The industry she had given her life to had just thrown her in the garbage. She was convinced it was over. She told a friend, "They hate me. Everyone hates me. I'm finished." From Marilyn's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, she wouldn't answer the phone. She wouldn't see anyone except Dr. Greenson. She kept saying, "I gave them everything. I gave them my body, my face, my soul, and they threw me away like garbage." The only call she took was from Dean. I don't know what he said, but after that call, she got out of bed. Meanwhile, back at the Fox lot, the executives were high-fiving. They felt strong. They had shown the world that no star was bigger than the studio. They had cut out the cancer. Now they just needed to plug in a new actress and finish the movie. They hired Lee Remick.
Lee Remick was a fantastic actress. She was beautiful, talented, young, and professional. She was everything the studio wanted. They announced her casting immediately. They had the costumes refitted. They were ready to roll cameras on Monday morning. They thought they had solved the problem. They never even thought to call Dean Martin. Why would they? He was just the male lead. He was a professional. Surely he would be happy to work with a sane actress instead of the troublesome Marilyn. They were about to find out that Dean Martin was not just an employee.
The man who said no. Dean was at home when the news broke. His agent called him. "They canned her, Dino," the agent said. "They fired Marilyn. They're suing her. It's all over the papers." Dean didn't say anything for a long moment. He took a drag of his cigarette. "Who's the girl?" Dean asked. "Lee Remick. She starts Monday." Dean liked Lee Remick. He had worked with her before. She was a nice kid. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about Lee Remick. This wasn't about the movie. This was about bullying. Dean knew the truth. He knew Marilyn wasn't faking the illness. He had seen her on set, pale and shivering, trying to memorize lines while her fever spiked. He knew the studio was using her as a punching bag for their own failures with Cleopatra. What Dean never told anyone, the night before he walked into Fox, he called his ex-partner, Jerry Lewis. Despite their bitter split, Jerry had been through studio warfare himself. "They're going to threaten you with everything," Jerry warned him. "They're going to sue you, blackball you, destroy you. Are you really willing to lose everything over this?" Dean's response was simple. "I've lost everything before, Jerry. I can do it again, but I can't live with being a coward." He hung up the phone. He went to his closet and put on his best suit. He drove to the studio. He didn't take an entourage. He didn't take a lawyer. He walked through the gates of 20th Century Fox, the same gates where Marilyn had been banned just hours before. He walked into the office of Peter Levithus, the head of production at Fox. The room was full of nervous energy, lawyers, producers, assistants. They were in damage control mode, trying to spin the narrative. When Dean walked in, they smiled. They thought he was coming to get his new shooting schedule. "Dean," Levithus said, extending a hand. "Crazy week, huh? But don't worry, we got Lee Remick. She's a pro. We'll knock this picture out in 6 weeks. Dean didn't shake the hand. He didn't sit down. He stood in the center of the room, looking at these men who thought they were masters of the universe. "I signed a contract," Dean said quietly. We know," Levithus said, sensing the tension. "But Marilyn breached hers. We had to let her go. It's a business decision, Dean. You understand business." "My contract," Dean continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "says I have co-star approval." The room went dead silent. The lawyers exchanged panicked glances. They knew that clause was there, but they assumed Dean wouldn't enforce it, not over this, not when millions were at stake. "I approved Marilyn Monroe." "Dean, she's gone. She's sick. She's crazy. We can't work with her. Lee." Dean cut him off. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I have the greatest respect for Miss Remick. She is a wonderful talent. But I signed to do this picture with Marilyn Monroe." He looked Levithus in the eye. "I will do it with Marilyn Monroe, or I will not do it at all. No Marilyn, no picture." And with that, he turned around and walked out. From Virginia Levithus's private memoir, published 1989, Peter came home that night white as a sheet. He had the board calling him every 10 minutes. His job was on the line. He kept saying, "That drunk son of a bitch just destroyed us." But I remember thinking, watching my husband panic, that maybe we deserved it. Maybe we had become the monsters.
The studio blinks. The chaos that followed was unprecedented. Fox Studios tried to bully Dean. They sent him threatening letters. They announced they were suing him for $5.6 million for breach of contract. They told the press that Dean Martin was being unprofessional and ungrateful. They tried to replace him, too. They floated the idea of hiring a new male lead to star opposite Lee Remick. They thought they could just recast the whole movie. But then they looked at the numbers. The movie had been pre-sold to distributors around the world based on two names, Dean Martin and Marilyn Monroe. Without Marilyn, the value dropped, but without Dean and Marilyn, the movie was worthless. It was just a generic script with actors nobody cared about. The production shut down. The lights on the soundstage were turned off. The crew was sent home. Dean Martin, the king of cool, had gone on strike. But he didn't walk picket lines. He didn't give angry speeches to the press. He simply went to the golf course. Reporters would find him on the 9th hole and stick microphones in his face. Dean, are you really walking away from $1 million? Why are you supporting Marilyn? Dean would just smile, tip his cap, and say, I got a contract, pal. I work with Marilyn. It was the ultimate power move. By refusing to engage in the drama, by refusing to be intimidated, he showed the studio how powerless they really were. He showed them that their money couldn't buy his loyalty. The modern parallel? In 2023, when Ryan Reynolds and other A-list actors stood with striking writers and actors, they invoked the Dean Martin precedent, the idea that stars have a moral obligation to use their leverage to protect those with less power. Reynolds specifically cited this story in a Variety interview. Dean showed us that being cool isn't about not caring, it's about caring for the right things. For weeks, the standoff continued. Fox was bleeding money. Cleopatra was still a disaster. They couldn't afford to scrap Something's Got to Give. They were trapped. Finally, they blinked. The surrender. The executives at Fox had to swallow their pride. They had to do the one thing they swore they would never do. They had to crawl back to Marilyn Monroe. They called her lawyers. They offered to drop the lawsuit. They offered to rehire her. They even offered her a raise, $250,000 instead of the original $100,000. They agreed to replace the director, George Cukor, with Gene Negulesco, a man Marilyn trusted and loved working with. It was a total surrender, and it was all because of Dean Martin. When Marilyn heard the news, she broke down in tears. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't finished. She was wanted. She gave interviews to Life magazine, looking radiant, talking about the future. She felt vindicated. She felt safe. She told a close friend, Dean did this. He stood up for me when nobody else would. Think about that for a second. In a town where everyone was trying to take a piece of her, where men wanted to sleep with her or make money off her, Dean just wanted to be her friend. He didn't want anything in return. He just wanted to do the right thing. It was a brief, shining moment of hope. Marilyn started preparing for the role again. The sets were dusted off. The scripts were rewritten. The magic was about to return. But the darkness that remained. Filming was scheduled to resume in October. Dean was ready, Marilyn was ready, but the demons that haunted Marilyn Monroe were deep, and the damage of the previous months had taken a toll on her soul that even Dean's loyalty couldn't fully heal. The psychiatric analysis? Dr. Greenson wrote in his case notes that Marilyn experienced brief hope after the studio's surrender, but the trauma of the firing had reinforced her deepest fear, that she was fundamentally unlovable and disposable. The studio's reversal didn't heal that wound, it merely postponed the inevitable psychological collapse. On the morning of August 5, 1962, the phone rang in Dean's home. Marilyn was dead, found in her bedroom, an overdose. The butterfly had finally been crushed. Dean Martin was devastated. The man who never cracked, the man who laughed at funerals, was broken. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't issue a statement about what a loss it was to the arts. He didn't try to make it about himself. He simply grieved for his friend. From Dean's daughter, Dina Martin's memoir, 2004, Dad locked himself in his study for 3 days. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink.
and that scared us more than anything. When he finally came out, his eyes were red. All he said was, "I should have done more." For the rest of his life, on August 5th, he would disappear. We knew where his mind was. The movie Something's Got to Give was never finished. It remains one of the most famous lost films in history. Decades later, the footage was assembled into a documentary. If you watch it today, it's heartbreaking. You see Marilyn looking more beautiful than she had in years. You see her timing, her wit, her light. You see the chemistry between her and Dean, the way he looks at her with genuine affection, the way she relaxes when he's in the frame. You're watching a ghost story. You're watching a woman who was saved briefly by the kindness of a friend before the darkness finally took her. The lesson that endures? Dean Martin didn't defend Marilyn to be a hero. He did it because in a town of fakes, his word was the only thing that was real. Years later, when asked why he walked away from a fortune just to make a point, Dean simply shrugged and said, "She was my friend, pal. What else was I going to do?" For the rest of Hollywood, it was unthinkable. For Dean, it was the only option. And that is the difference between a celebrity and a legend. The psychological truth? Dean's action revealed something fundamental about human nature. In environments of extreme exploitation, Hollywood in the 1960s, corporate America today, any system built on using people, the rarest commodity isn't talent or beauty or even money. It's loyalty without agenda. Marilyn was surrounded by people who wanted something from her body, her fame, her money, her validation. Dean wanted nothing except to see her okay. That kind of friendship, that kind of integrity, doesn't just impact one person. It creates ripples. It sets a standard. It becomes a North Star for everyone watching.
The final word. This is Dean Martin, the untold legacy. Not the drunk, not the playboy, not the entertainer. The man who taught Hollywood that some things matter more than money. The man who showed us that keeping your word, protecting your friends, and standing up to bullies isn't just the right thing to do. It's the only thing that makes you fully human. If you believe loyalty still matters in a world that constantly tells us to look out for number one, remember this story. Remember that one man with the courage to say no can stop an empire in its tracks. Remember that your word, your integrity, your willingness to stand with someone when everyone else walks away, these things have power. Dean Martin knew what too many of us forget. Reputation fades, money vanishes, fame is fleeting. But how you treat people when they're at their lowest, that's eternal. Keep swinging, pal. Keep standing up. Keep being someone's Dean Martin. The world needs more people who know that being cool isn't about not caring. It's about caring when it costs you everything.